And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of intel services, probably not American. And we have every right to ask, on whose behalf was he working? How does a guy go from being a math teacher at the Dalton School in the late 70s with no college degree to having multiple airplanes, a private island, and the largest residential house in Manhattan? Where did all the money come from? And no one has ever gotten to the bottom of that because no one has ever tried. And moreover, it's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government.
Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands. I've said plenty this last weekend. So if you guys want to see my commentary on it, that's fine.
So I have a lot of ideas for big videos I want to work on, but I've had like a long period of like various social engagements, and I don't know if it's a common trait of OCD, but after a lot of them, I just feel like exhausted physically, despite the fact I didn't do anything physical. It's a weird one, but I have resorted instead to making a one-shot video today. Now, if you are new to my channel, and I have a lot of new subscribers in the last week or so, a one-shot video is a less structured video, a less edited video, and kind of me just giving my thoughts on like a random topic. Now, this is going to be technically a one-shot, but I'm going to put some editing in there because I want to actually show you some footage of stuff. But today I wanted to talk about the conservative or MAGA Civil War over the Jeffrey Epstein files. Now, Donald Trump obviously campaigned on releasing the Jeffrey Epstein files, even though he was president and Jeffrey Epstein died.
But a lot of big people went to that island. But fortunately, I was not one of them.
It's just very strange for a lot of people that the list of clients that went to the island has not been made public.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Probably will be, by the way. Probably.
So if you're able to, you'll be...
Yeah, I'd certainly take a look at it. Now, Kennedy's interesting because it's so many years ago. You know, they do that for danger, too, because, you know, it endangers certain people, et cetera, et cetera. So Kennedy is very different from the Epstein thing. But yeah, I'd be inclined to do the Epstein. I'd have no problem with it.
His FBI director and deputy FBI director were very vocal conspiracy theorists generally, but were people who heavily bought into, I would call them conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein, although I would say it's not like they're insane for thinking there is something obviously off with this guy.
Please do not let that story go.
Who has Jeffrey Epstein's
Black Book?
Black Book?
FBI.
But who? That is that. I mean, there's.
Oh, that's under direct control of the director of the FBI.
What the hell are the House Republicans doing? They have the majority. You can't get the list? Put on your big boy pants.
Who's on the Epstein tapes, folks? Who's on those tapes? Who's in those black books? Why have they been hiding it?
And while this civil war is very entertaining for people to see a conservative movement just eat each other because they have got themselves so hysterical about this one guy, I do want to talk about how it fundamentally shows that conservatives do not care about the victims of people like Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, partly because everyone knows Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and it stands to reason that he is on some sort of list, and maybe Epstein had blackmail material on Donald Trump. We don't know for sure, but it seems maybe likely because of their relationship together. And these people have never cared about the victims of exploitation, whether that be children, teenagers, or adults. And basically, these conspiracy theories, and even taking a side of being released the list or never released the list, is all based on pushing a political agenda for these people, because we know conservatives don't give a shit about this because their movements are often so rife with people who do this terrible shit, and Donald Trump just absolutely embodies this. So let's talk about all of this today, and let's talk about firstly what I think of all this stuff around Jeffrey Epstein. It's actually something I followed since before he died, and there's been like very good podcasts. I'll see if I can find them on my history that I listened to either when it just happened or before, that went into real detail, interviewed loads of victims, and really outlined, which I don't think people talk about this part enough, outlined how he was let off in the mid-2000s when he was charged in Florida for these crimes. And it's absolutely unbelievable, and just talks about the collaboration between the prosecution and the defense lawyers, where essentially the prosecution was acting like his defense. It's so wild. And his imprisonment for his crimes, which I think were bumped down to soliciting a prostitute, again, considering what he did is absolutely insane, was he was put in some sort of jail, which he had to report to, and he had to stay in, I think, several nights a week, but he could move to his various properties. Like, it was so clear, even back then, this guy was being covered for, and it's not helped by people like Alex Acosta and then Pam Bondi being rewarded by Donald Trump himself and being put into positions of power in both Trump administrations, adds to all these conspiracy theories. Jeffrey Epstein was, of course, a very powerful guy, was basically the money manager for Les Wexner, who, among other things, was like the head of Abercrombie, and actually lived on land owned by him. And before that, taught at a school that Bill Barr's dad ran, despite having no experience teaching. And through being like in the elite circles of the UK and the US, he mingled with so many famous people. Now, what I think is actually going to happen is, if this list gets released, I think a lot of people who might have not actually done anything bad are going to be lumped in with people like Donald Trump, because it's pretty clear that if you listen to all these documentaries and read a lot about him, he just existed in the New York elite, and he hosted like loads and loads of dinner parties. And this is all outside all the terrible shit he done. So I think a lot of people, if this ever gets released, are going to be lumped in with like the worst people, like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and these types of people. But in that as well, what helped him get in the door, and this is very clear in the documentaries about him, is Ghislaine Maxwell and her connections. Now, to get into the conspiracy theories a little bit, so Ghislaine Maxwell's dad was Robert Maxwell. This guy is like really interesting, and I don't think people talk about him enough, considering like how well connected he was. British intelligence thought he was a triple agent, and his main allegiance was to Israel. And the reason when he died, he had like the entire Israeli elite come to his funeral, is because during the conquest of Palestine by the IDF in 1948, he was essentially like the middleman between Czechoslovakia and Israel. The USSR essentially supported Israel's conquest by using Czechoslovakia as a proxy, but Robert Maxwell was born in Czechoslovakia. He fled during World War II and served in the British military. So he became like really well connected with various different governments. He had like one foot in the Eastern Bloc because of Czechoslovakia. He had one foot in the Western intelligence services because of Britain. His main allegiance, people think, was to Israel, and I think that's pretty clear. And they liked him so much in Israel because of what he did in 1948. But Robert Maxwell wasn't just an Israeli spy, he was a billionaire who was super influential in British society. He was also a Labour MP in the 1960s, and he owned the Mirror Group, which still exists today in some capacity. And before he died, he basically robbed the pension fund, and then he was found dead in the ocean, allegedly falling off his yacht. But he could have been probably taken out by like any country's intelligence service. Maybe he double-crossed them, maybe he was going to expose them, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding his death. But he was an absolutely very influential person who just had so much connections in the world of politics, media, had connections in the Soviet Union, had connections in Israel, had connections in the UK, had connections in America, and Ghislaine Maxwell is his daughter. So that is where I guess a lot of the fuel for the conspiracies come from, is Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were pretty much a couple, and she's been convicted as well for participating in this massive trafficking scheme. But it stands to reason, if you have someone from that background combined with someone like this who has a lot of money, doing all they're doing, they are probably a target for the intelligence services. Now, people often say Jeffrey Epstein was in the CIA and he was in Mossad. I actually highly doubt he was officially in either of them. If one of them was in the intelligence service, I would say Ghislaine Maxwell might have been in Mossad. But I would say both of them probably served as intelligence assets. So I don't think they were officially part of any organization. but they had deep connections to the intelligence community. And in the case of Epstein, he was probably being protected by the CIA and Mossad from prosecution when he was found out. And his role was probably just to get so much blackmail material on various different figures, probably mainly in politics, but across the elite of British and American society. Of course, you have Prince Andrew in the UK. And when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein's death, I would not be surprised if it was a coordinated thing by various intelligence agencies, Mossad, CIA, and MI6 to protect the powerful people in all these countries. So I think it's pretty logical that they would take him out because he could have easily exposed a lot of powerful people. Now getting into the MAGA conspiracy theories, and this is why I don't believe they actually give a shit about the victims. So we can't ignore QAnon, and we can't even ignore people who might not believe in it, but they still believe in like some sort of cult of nonces that run the US government, but they're primarily liberals and Democrats, and Donald Trump was going to expose all these people. Why a lot of Republicans are so fixated with Jeffrey Epstein, despite the fact it was clear he was close to Donald Trump, is because they just want him to expose people like Bill Clinton. They primarily care about it for political reasons. They don't give a shit about caring about the victims of Epstein and these various billionaires. It all plays into a conspiracy theory that is similar to QAnon, if not QAnon itself. So let's get into the MAGA Civil War. It's come out like through various Wired articles. The footage they released has been edited and has been tampered with. The footage they said showed that no one entered Jeffrey Epstein's cell during the time he died. And I also think it's pretty clear, and I might show you a clip or two here, that Pam Bondi is being set up to take the fall.
That concerns either testifying or testimony for Ghislaine Maxwell, potentially before Congress, or if you would support members like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Anna Paulina Luna on the release of subpoenaing the Epstein documents from the DOJ, whether you would support either of those.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Marjorie or Anna about that specific subject, but I'm for transparency. We're intellectually consistent in this. But I agree with the sentiment that we need to put it out there. And you know, Pam Bondi, I don't know, when she originally made the statement, I think she was talking about documents, as I understood it. They were on her desk. I don't know that she was specific about a list or whatever, but she needs to come forward and explain that to everybody. I like Pam. I mean, I think she's done a good job. We need the DOJ focusing on the major priorities. So let's get this thing resolved so that they can deal with violent crime and public safety and election integrity.
But because the whole MAGA grifting ecosystem has fixated on Epstein because of this connection to Bill Clinton, they have drove their audience absolutely rabid for the Epstein files. So when they had that ridiculous stunt where MAGA influencers went to the White House to get like binders about the Jeffrey Epstein files, they were absolutely loving it until they realized there was actually like fucking nothing new in those files. So the pressure campaign on all these people to release the files has been going on a long time. And because of Dan Bongino, the deputy director of the FBI, and Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, being confirmed, and they're like these conspiracy theorists about Epstein as well, they like were just thinking, oh my god, now's the time, Trump's gonna finally release them, the deep state will be exposed by our team. But turns out that now all of these people are defending not releasing the Epstein files. For a variety of reasons. It could compromise Donald Trump himself and expose him for, you know, being a close friend of Epstein and maybe engaging in these activities. But also what I think is more likely is, while Donald Trump is likely in them, I could see a scenario where people would be disappointed by what these files would say about Trump. But what I think is actually in there is probably a lot of Republican donors and Republican elites, or maybe just like very wealthy people who fund the Republican Party. They're probably in there a lot more than Donald Trump. Like, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is rational, but I think it would make more sense if he's talking about releasing these files loads and loads and loads, and there's nothing in his self-preservation that goes, maybe I should stop talking about this because I could actually be in that. But what might have happened is, you know, they've gone through the files, maybe they've looked at them, and then a bunch of names have kept popping up of people who have funded the Republican Party. Maybe Mossad and CIA have both pressured Donald Trump to not release them. But also in terms of self-preservation, he could be in there for whatever reason, but he's just going to be lumped in with all the terrible shit. And that's the same for most people who are going to be in these files, even if they haven't actually done anything or proven to have done anything, but merely by association, they will be condemned with the rest of them. So that's why I'm thinking Donald Trump won't actually release these files for a variety of reasons. I don't think it's purely just because there's something incriminating about him in there. I think it's more to do with the conservative elite in America and maybe Israel and donors to the Republican Party more than anything. But now let me just prove my point more that MAGA influencers don't give a shit about victims, and they don't give a shit about people who suffered under both Jeffrey Epstein and the elite who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there's a lot of them who, again, have been going crazy about Epstein. Charlie Kirk, Tim Pool have been banging on about this for a long, long time. And now, along with Donald Trump, they are telling everyone to shut up about it. Do not talk about it anymore. Let's sweep this under the rug. We don't need to focus on it.
Plenty was said this last weekend at our event about Epstein. Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands. I've said plenty this last weekend. So if you guys want to see my commentary on it, that's fine. We have escalatory action potentially being taken in Ukraine and Russia. We have tons of announcements happening when it comes to NATO. But let me just say this again. Everyone knows my opinion about the Epstein thing, the messaging fumble. I would love to see the DOJ move to unseal the grand jury testimony. I think that would be a big win. I would love to see that. And I'm going to trust my friends, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, my friend Pam Bondi, all these guys. I'm going to, Todd Blanche, I'm going to trust them to solve it. Ball's in their court. I think that there was plenty of, let's say, speeches that were directed towards this topic this last weekend. So we don't need to spend our valuable time on this program relitigating it.
So obviously they never really cared about exposing the victims. They only cared about this conspiracy theory about Democrats. And now Donald Trump has told them to knock it off. They're perfectly willing to do that. But at the same time, it's not going away. MAGA are frothing. And you have other people using it for their own ends. And here is where the Israel stuff comes into play. So you guys might have noticed there has now been a little break in the MAGA movement where there's a significant amount of them who are anti-Israel. But not for much love of the Palestinian people. These people absolutely hate majority Muslim countries. So it's not out of any love for that. They hate Arabs generally. It's more because they are anti-Semitic, so they perceive anything to represent the Jewish people and ethnic identity and religion to be a bad thing. And when they discuss things like Israel, it's mainly about how Israel controls American politics. Not that America love Israel to do its dirty work in the Middle East, and that is why America has backed Israel very hard since 1967. No, it's Israel and a Jewish conspiracy theory that actually controls American politics to make sure the American government doesn't do things in the interest of the American people. It primarily does things for Israel. So Candace Owens has been a great example of that. But someone who has jumped on this more recently and maybe senses which way the wind is blowing on Israel in regards to MAGA support is Tucker Carlson, who recently was speaking about, you're not allowed to say that Jeffrey Epstein was in Mossad and Jeffrey Epstein was working for Mossad to undermine the US government, right?
And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of intel services, probably not American. And we have every right to ask, on whose behalf was he working? How does a guy go from being a math teacher at the Dalton School in the late 70s with no college degree to having multiple airplanes, a private island, and the largest residential house in Manhattan? Where did all the money come from? And no one has ever gotten to the bottom of that because no one has ever tried. And moreover, it's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government. Now, no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty. There is nothing wrong with saying that. There is nothing hateful about saying that. There's nothing anti-Semitic about saying. There's nothing even anti-Israel about saying that. So criticizing the behavior of a government agency does not make you a hater. It makes you a free person. It makes you a citizen. You're allowed to do that because you're not a slave. You're a citizen. And you have a right to expect that your government will not act against your interests, and you have a right to demand that foreign governments not be allowed to act against your interests. That's not creepy. It shouldn't be forbidden. And yet all of us have trained ourselves to believe that you can't say that somehow, that that's like too naughty and forbidden. And the effect of making that off limits has been to create a lot of resentment, and I'll say it, hate online, where people feel like they can't just say, like, what the hell is this? You have the former Israeli prime minister living in your house. You have had all this contact with the foreign government. Were you working on behalf of Mossad? Were you running a blackmail operation on behalf of foreign government? By the way, every single person in Washington, D.C. thinks that. I've never met anyone who doesn't think that. I don't know any of them that hate Israel, but no one feels they can say that. Why? And I think the longer that we play along with it, the more subterranean and creepy and hateful the conversation actually becomes. So I think it's better just to say it right out loud. Did this happen? And of course, that question has been asked to the government of Israel, and their answer is, we're not going to tell you. And I think our answer should be, no. As long as we're sending you money, if you were committing crimes on our soil, we have an absolute right to know, did you do this or not? And yet everybody has been so brainwashed into thinking that's somehow an expression of hate or bigotry when it's not.
So I think it's pretty clear with people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens is, well, I mean, of course, they don't give a shit about people who abuse teenagers or these trafficking rings or whatever. They're primarily using the Epstein stuff to push their new rhetoric about America first and their pivot into anti-Israel content, which has become increasingly popular on the right these days and is allowing these people to stand out a bit more rather than be complicit in like the hive mind of support for Israel. And you even saw that with Tucker Carlson obviously questioning Ted Cruz really hard about why he supports the Israeli attack on Iran. So that is another factor. And then you just have general people who are kind of just like sticking their flag in the sand about, release the files. We don't trust Donald Trump anymore to do the right thing. And I think that mainly is self-preservation as well, because you just can't defend it. Like, you can't defend Donald Trump not releasing the files. And if you were making a calculated decision based on self-preservation and audience capture, there is no way you defend him from this. So even if you broadly still support Donald Trump, you can't defend this thing because the MAGA base has been so riled up about this. Now, somewhat surprisingly, the Democrats have been attacking the Republicans on this. Why I say surprisingly is if there are any Epstein files, 100% Bill Clinton is all over them. Like that, without a doubt, I am pretty sure. Like Bill Clinton was way closer with Jeffrey Epstein than Donald Trump was. And despite both of them being prolific predators, there is more evidence right now that Bill Clinton will be implicated in these things. And obviously Bill Clinton, because of Hillary, still has some sort of sway on the Democrats. So I am surprised to see them going off on trying to get Trump to release the files. But it's just like a political calculation at the end of the day. I have seen other Democrats like Richie Torres say that all these theories around Epstein are stupid. You should believe the official narrative, which is, very interesting considering this is the Democratic politician who is most bought by the Israeli lobby, playing into my theory that for a variety of reasons they're not releasing it, but one of them might be because there's damaging information about people who are either associated with Israel or some sort of funders to either party who are pro-Israel, and the intelligence services of America and Israel want to protect them. But just like with the various conspiracy theories we've seen about everyone being some sort of child abuser or whatever, it's pretty clear that the elite never care about this. And I'm not saying your average conservative might not care about this, because most humans would care about this, right? Most humans would care about this terrible shit in a vacuum. But I think it's pretty clear in this specific instance, this MAGA base and conservative base have been riled up to see it as a very political issue. And the reason they care about it so much is because they think it's going to expose the Democrats, and they think it's going to expose liberals and leftists, rather than they think it's going to expose the widespread abuse of primarily teenagers by these elites that was facilitated by Maxwell and Epstein. When we see that many, many times, look at Donald Trump, look what he's been found guilty of. Look at, let's say, the Catholic Church, and I've had experience in that in my own community, Irish Catholic, and think about the history of our country with the Catholic Church. And if you are Irish or you come from an Irish diasporic community, You know how many defenders of the Catholic Church you will get in spite of overwhelming evidence what they've done, and how much people will overlook things and they won't care about things, especially if they've been indoctrinated in a certain way because they want to protect the image of something in their head. So they say, oh, it's a few bad apples and not an institutional thing. And yes, nearly everyone who always says this in the Catholic community is a conservative, and that also includes American conservatives as well. And I think our society generally just doesn't give a shit about this stuff. Like, there are so many people walking free right now who either have crazy allegations against them or pretty much has been proven and nothing gets done. And you think about the elites who have been exposed, like Prince Andrew, and they're essentially allowed back into public life where people don't always talk about this. And it is absolutely rife in all institutions. I would just say the conservative hypocrisy is normally more stark. And I'm not going to act like this type of thing is a political issue generally where like it doesn't exist on one side and exists on the other side. But I do think it is often more rife in conservative communities, mainly because the incentive to actually expose this stuff is usually pretty slim from the elite. That goes with the Catholic Church as well, because it makes them look bad. So with the Republicans right now, they're in the rare situation where their own like supporters want them to release these files. That will be very, very damaging to the elite of the party, but that's because they have weaponized these things so much to make it a partisan thing to try and attack the Democrats consistently. And they've played into this conspiracy theory, and they've really like turbocharged these conspiracy theories and preyed upon them to get support. But yes, because it's not a bipartisan issue, although Bill Clinton will be all over that, it's very likely Donald Trump could be in it. And if not, it's very likely a lot of people who have either funded the Republicans or maybe play active roles in the party right now, they will be on that list, and it will be very, very incriminating. So now they're having to cover it up. And that is why there's a MAGA Civil War, but you're seeing like various different factions of opportunists pop up so they can use this to their own ends and politicize it as well. When the main thing is, this is a tragic thing that was allowed to happen and covered up by various state governments and the US government. And these people largely will never see justice because most of the perpetrators are still walking free. And if Donald Trump gets his way, they will never be exposed. And although the Epstein case is obviously the most high profile one, it's just another symptom of a wider issue that is really not prosecuted enough, not discussed enough, and through various institutions, whether that be governments or religions, so many of the victims are either made to keep silent, or if they speak up, they are ostracized and demonized. And often the community around these things is complicit in the cover-up, because to support the victims often means going against these narratives around the institution. And like I said, that's what you often see in Ireland, which thankfully is changing more recently, but it is still an element there. And I think conservatives, more than anyone else, have the incentive to protect the status quo, even from very credible and terrible allegations. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on all of this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.